Welcome to El Parenting Podcast.
This is Amy,
Adriana,
and Jen. We'll share la locura and chaos on raising children. We'll cover a range of topics, including discipline, communication, education, health, and cultural traditions. We believe that parenting takes a village, and we're here to support you every step of the way. So grab un cafecito or wine, sit back, and join us for a laugh as we explore the joys and challenges of raising happy and healthy children.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to El Parenting Podcast. You are tuning in to episode 8, and I'm here joined by Jenny and Adriana. Today, we're going to be tackling what some might consider a touchy subject, a sensitive topic. People want to find balance around this subject, specifically with their boys. So we're going to be taking on the topic of toxic masculinity. So I guess we can start off by defining what that means. Like, what exactly is toxic masculinity, or how do you understand that word or that term?
Is this for us?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to put it... Go ahead.
So I guess by definition, it's society's interpretation of masculinity that has negatively impacted men's mental and physical health and those around them. So any thoughts on that? And we can go deeper into that definition in a minute, but I just want to know, like, your initial thought about that term.
So from what I understand is this idea that men, like a stereotype of how men have to behave, right? They have to be tough. They can not be feminine, according to this article or reading, or there's no sign of weakness, and also have to have like power and control. So I think that's when it becomes like toxic, when men are stereotyped into being, one of those three categories. So like that's kind of when we have boys like, oh, boys don't cry, or boys need to be tough, or sayings like men up. Which,
right.
Me I have three boys. I struggle a little bit with this, right? Because I do want them to be tough. And then I'm not saying I don't want them to be feminine or cry, but I also know that this world is kind of, what is it saying? Doggy eats dog, or what
dog
is it?
Eat dog. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want them to be facing unnecessary challenges, because we do live in a society where being masculine means something that is not necessarily like how it should be, if that makes any sense, right? Like we haven't evolved as a society to go like this awakening of it's okay to have feminine, traits, or it's okay to cry, or it's okay to deal with issues in a more healthier way. Like we still live in a society that embraces this idea that masculine is to be tough, and that masculine brings power, So how do you raise the future men that can be tough but not abusive? I guess that we're gonna be like talking about this. So
Sure.
There you go.
What about you, Jenny?
Man, first of all, I hate labels. I struggle with that. And this is just another stupid label to me. The way that I would define it is, dude, you're fucked up. You had like a messed up childhood that transferred over into adulthood, and like go get yourself into therapy and get with the program. That's my clarity vision of this toxic masculinity. But I wish that we could, I wish that we can break down that word a little bit differently, so that maybe that in itself would help the men in our lives or in our circle or whatever. Bacon is announcing himself. Sorry, I don't know if you'll be able to cut that out. But that's how I feel about it. And I come from a bit of I don't know if I want to say a different family, or I got lucky. My dad was amazing, like A+ person and father. And then I went on to marry somebody that is basically very, very similar to my father. So I don't really surround myself around those men, but also, and Adriana can probably, give her feedback on this. We were all raised pretty much the same, But I don't think my brothers have any toxic masculinity, right, Adriana? I don't know. What do you think?
Well,
I mean, I know my older brother's a little old school.
yes, I think that's what it is. You know, it's kind of like toxic masculinity has such a like bad ring to it, right? And I would say like George is like old school in the sense of he wants the kids to be tough, and not just like the boys, but the kids in general, right? Like, I mean that we're in this age of like video games and electronics, and they don't want to get dirty, and they don't want, you know, they want like manos de oficina, you know, they don't have
Like
strength, they don't,
he wants a man's man.
yeah, you
Get
know,
dirt,
and
do the yard work.
do the yard work, do things, and I know that it plays into like stereotypes, you know, like I'm not saying that. I think the fine line is that, right? When you're creating, or not just creating, but when you're supporting stereotypes like how we grew up, right? For example, you know, we grew up in a Latin household, so my brother didn't clean because that was the girls' job, right? So all the girls cleaned, my brother didn't clean. But then the brother, you know, had to like, I don't know, take out the trash, and that was his job. So when you're in kind of enforcing certain activities because of your gender, which let's not even get into that because apparently gender is fluid, and you know there's a whole other conversation. But when you're creating tasks according to your gender, then you're in a way sort of supporting this idea that men need to be tough and that girls need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and that's when it gets like complicated, right? Because as they grow up, that's the message.
Right.
And that's my point with labels, because it's the same shit.
So you're
It's the label of toxic masculinity, and oh, if you're a girl, you do this, or if you're a boy, you do this. It's
Right,
like
so like-
another label.
Right, the gender roles are almost perpetuating these behaviors, right? So so if you go in a little bit deeper, because I think one of you mentioned something about like what does that mean in smaller chunks. So basically it's three categories: toughness, which is something that Adriana mentioned, where men are strong, aggressive, and emotionally hardened. 2 is anti-femininity. Men reject any and all feminine traits, including emotion, accepting help, and domesticity, which is what we talked about, some of the gender roles and cooking, cleaning, and all that stuff. And power, where men are worthy only if they have money, power, status, and influence, right? So those are basically, if we break it down, those are the what they call the tenets of masculinity. So I almost wonder if, and you know, Adriana, I would want to know what you think about this. Maybe it's not the absence of toughness, but also having both, because it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. You can be tough while also allowing yourself to cry. Is that what you're trying to say, between finding a balance?
Yeah, and you know, in us like Latinos, right? So you see that all the time, right? Like, you know, boys can cry. You're not supposed to cry. Why are you being so soft? Why are you so sensitive? You know, my father says, oh, when Gabriel that's my oldest, oh, he's around too many women. And that's because he's very sensitive. So that's the way of kind of like the jab, right? That's toxic masculinity right there, right? Sort of like, oh, you're around too many women, and that basically implies that he's a softie. Right. But I try to work with him, and I mean with Gabriel, in the sense of it's okay to talk about his emotions. So we talk about a lot of different things, him and I, and then and I'm a big advocate of mental health and seeing therapy. So we talk about that being perfectly normal and okay. And you know, he can talk to somebody if he needs to, because I know also I'm limited, right, on my abilities. I'm not a therapist. So just kind of having these conversations that, okay, it's okay to cry and feel your feelings. But then at some point you need to overcome and come up with a plan of action and
like
deal
resilience.
with it. Yeah, and it's not just Gabriel. I do that with Eva as well, you know, because she's very sensitive too. And of course, you know, because of society, like it's okay for girls to be all sensitive and oh, you're in your period, you know, kind of thing. But it's the same thing with her, like, you know, feel the feels, but then you have to kind of grow the fuck up and tackle it and
put your pants on,
steps,
right?
You know? I mean, crying doesn't solve everything, and we all know that. We all need like a good cry, but then what do you do with that after, right? Like you need to pick up yourself up and keep going because that's just life, you know. Like you said, build that resilience, being resilient, and then problem solving. You know, crying and feeling bad about things are not going to get you anywhere. So, how do you turn that into?
But they need to have their space to do that without a doubt. Like I know it's a little different, right? Because Billy's only still 5, but I try because I can get frustrated too with her crying sometimes. I try to picture her as if she's only 6 months old or she's only a year, where she can't verbally explain to me what's going on with all those emotions. Because the reality is that if you're crying, it's because you can't fully express it verbally. And that will happen at 5, at 10, at 43, you know, it can happen at any stage of our lives. And I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace and space. And yes, like, don't feed into it either, right? I'll give you a great example, because yesterday Billy was having a little bit of a crying fit and she was looking at herself in the mirror and it was agitating herself more and more and more. It was like she was feeding into her crying. And I'm like, Billy, stop looking at yourself in the mirror, bro. Like you're working yourself up. Like, let's remove ourselves from this scenario. And then, like Adriana said, then we went on to the problem solving. But allowing your kids that space is necessary.
Yeah, and crying, I think, is also like just like a physical manifestation of your frustration of whatever's going on. I'm one of those people. I'm a Cancer, and when I'm fuming, I start to cry. And it's not because I'm sad about what's happening. It's because that's my body's physical release of all the chemicals that are just firing up in my body, right? So if you see me crying when I'm mad, run. It's not because I'm sad. But to that point, I also think, like I always say, like we're like tea kettles, right? We have to have, if we don't have a way to release that, whether it's crying, whether it's screaming into a pillow, whatever it is, right? I think we all need like a physical release of frustration. And I don't think that necessarily makes us weak. I think it makes us human. And I also, like, you said something, Jenny, about how you grew up with, your father was an A+ person, right? My dad was also the same way. Like, my dad has cried in front of me, and I never grew up thinking that that was weird. And my dad was one of 14 in Venezuela in the 1950s. No había mucho que hacer. So he has, I think it's like 7 brothers and 7 sisters. So he grew up around lots of women. And I actually had my first period when I was with my dad, and he did not flinch. He was like, okay, I'll go to the store and buy you some stuff. Like, it wasn't even like, he didn't even bat an eye. Because he was just very comfortable with that. And I appreciate that, because I would have been mortified if I had a dad that would have freaked out of something so normal in women. And then on the flip side, I had my grandfather who would tell me, usted no llora solo si sus padres se mueren. Like, I was only allowed to cry if my parents died. Can you imagine? And mind you, I'm a female, so I can't imagine like what was the message to the boys, right? So I did kind of have a little bit of both, but I think more so like I'm not affected by men. I don't perceive men who cry as weak. I don't know. I see it as human. Like, I don't know why we're depriving them of that ability, I guess. Did you guys?
Well, I will say I don't think we're depriving them of anything. Like, that's not our problem that they're like that.
No,
like,
but
we're
society,
open.
I guess. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Were you ever told not to cry like that at any point growing up, or?
Oh,
really?
Yeah, I'll give you something to cry about.
Oh, yeah, that's different. Exactly.
Well, you know, like, so with the kids, it's hard, you know, because I'm like sometimes like, why are you crying? Because it's, you know, it's hard, like, you know, especially when I'm stressing, or, you know, this whole move was, it's being a lot. So it's like, why are you crying? Why are you crying? Like, what? Please tell me. Do you want me to cry too? I should be crying too. I do that, you know, I'm like, I should be crying too. I have to unpack all this stuff. And so then I have to catch myself. Okay, fine. You can cry. You're allowed to get yourself together, cry, feel your feels, then we'll talk about it. But I struggle with the tears. And I think mostly it's because I wasn't allowed to have these emotional outbursts, you know, so I have my own like trauma that I have to work through. But for the toxic masculinity part, it's it's hard in the context of like our Latino culture, you know, because how like men need to be, how Latin men need to be, and how they need to be providers, and how they need to be the caretakers, and we put a lot of this burden on that, right? So that goes into like power and influence and money, and I still feel that and this is probably gonna get canceled, right? Because we're talking about like gender stereotypes or whatever, but I think men need that sense of being providers and being leaders and being the caretakers. I do think that they need that. There's something, and I don't know if it's like biological but I do believe in that. And I do want to raise my boys to be caretakers and providers, not in a way that is controlling and a power, fuck, but I do want them to take, when they go and take a girl out for a date, I want them to offer to pay. I want them, and then maybe I'm just perpetuating gender stereotypes and roles, but I just think it's nice. And me personally being an alpha female, I still want a man that is going to take care of me and has my back and is a supporter. They don't necessarily have to make more money than I do, but I do want that partnership. So when do we cross that line of like, we're so focused on eliminating toxic masculinity that then we end up just removing the masculinity at all from men that, need to be men. Like those are the men.
That's what we need to remove, the toxic part, not the masculinity part.
Right,
Just
exactly.
remove the toxic part.
I'm like, it's like
because I feel like a man.
What is it? I saw a meme. I don't know. I follow some crazy liberal people, not liberal, but some crazy. I don't know what they are, but somebody was saying like this whole like toxic masculinity is bullshit because at the end of the day, those are the people that go to war for you. So it's kind of like, well, you have a point. You do need those crazy aggressors and that end up going to fight wars, but maybe we didn't have that, then we wouldn't be fighting wars. I don't know. So crazy.
I mean, I think, it kind of goes back to the almost separating the two because, again, I think somebody can be brave, like firefighters, cops, they do those jobs every day and they're risking their lives, but that doesn't mean like if they lose somebody on the job, like that doesn't mean they can go home and they can go home and cry about it, like they lost a person in a fire, like, you know what I mean? Like I think those two can coexist, and I think that's what Jenny's trying to say of just removing like the toxic part of it. I think men are almost like you said, maybe there's a biological component that they're hardwired to want to be providers, caretakers. I think that is in most men, I guess. I don't know. I think most men, when you ask them about becoming a father, they're like, I want to make sure I have my shit together, right? Before I bring, I think almost every man has answered that way when I ask them. So I think maybe there is that component where it's innate in them, but I think they're also allowed to feel their feelings. Like, I don't know. I think there's a balance that has to be met there.
That's what it boils down to because we're all human. That is it. Forget about the female. If you forget about the male part, we're all human. We all have our emotion levels. Like Adriana said, whether we're on our period or not, we have hormones. The guys have hormones. And sometimes you're feeling a little softer than other times, and just like us women, like Adriana was saying, I'm an alpha woman, then that means that you have more of that, I don't want to say aggression, more of that like power, and that's okay too. So you just have to find that balance amongst yourself, and just make sure that you're not putting yourself like on this pedestal. When I think of that toxic masculinity, I think of like a man thinking that he's the king and everybody else is below him, right? So it's like he has the power and he has the final say and the best word, and that's just not the reality. Just not the reality,
Mm-hmm. It's like, what was that? He just reminded me again, always with my movie quotes, from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. You know, guys, what I'm talking about. when she's giving her the daughter advice, and she said, "Yeah, the man is the head of the household, but the woman is the neck, and we turn it wherever which way." That's absolutely true. So there's always a woman behind the scenes there, right? So yeah, I mean, and that's another aspect of the toxic masculinity is do our sons see their spouses or women in general as equals, right? So that's another component of like, no, you cook and clean. Like, there's more layers to that than just the crying. So what did you see when you were growing up? Was your dad like a helper?
So my parents are divorced, and my dad and my stepdad are very different men. My dad does have those, present those traits of like, toxic masculinity in the sense of, just hyper focus on work, on providing, on, not the tears, not expressing emotion, then unleashing aggression when, things don't go out his way. My stepdad, it's more gentle, like not as aggressive, but it's more the perpetuating gender roles, right? Like women are supposed to be this way, or girls don't do this, they do that. So that's kind of like my experience growing up. And I remember just like I was a tomboy and I wanted to, be as a girl. At some point I wanted to be a boy because I was like, fuck this, like being a woman, it's very oppressive and I don't want to be restrained by my gender. So I thought like I'd rather be a man. Which now in hindsight, I'm glad that I didn't say that now, because then somebody would probably like just decide, oh, she wants to be a man or something, But back in the day, I was just like felt very.
You didn't want the
restricted by my
restraint.
gender. Huh?
You didn't want the restraint that comes
I
with
didn't
being
want
a
to be
woman.
restrained
I
by
got
my
you.
gender. So that's kind of like what I grew up with. I think that maybe like we have been focusing so much on the toxic masculinity that I feel like maybe we should talk about what healthy masculinity is. And that would probably be a better pill to swallow. Sort of like, not so much what the issue is, but what is it that we need to strive for. And I think the bottom line is like this whole toxic masculinity comes, the root of it all is that little boys don't learn how to deal with their aggression or their aggressive behavior because we don't allow them to talk about their feelings or have feelings or cry about their feelings or teach them that what healthy ways of dealing with those outbursts are, right? So then they grow up to be very frustrated, angry men that just the violent, outbursts when you're a 5-year-old look very different than when you're a grown-ass man, right? And that's what leads to this verbal abuse or domestic abuse, or this idea that they're more powerful because they never dealt with their own emotions growing up. So there's a lot of trauma behind that. So I wonder, like, with the 3 boys, I guess I should be focusing on, I like the idea of focusing more on healthy behaviors as opposed to like what the negative is. That way, like, I don't reinforce the negative, but actually look for solutions for the negative. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that mind frame a lot. And just because I'm on this boat, it's not only for our boys. Like, I think raising all of our children the same. So it's gonna apply to Eva. Whatever you do with the boys has to apply with the girls as well. Because I don't hear buzzing about toxic femininity, but I'm sure it's a thing.
Well, right now, like, for example, the whole teaching how to do the same things, we are trying to have the kids help with, like, cleaning out the kitchen, right? Like, setting up the table, cleaning out the kitchen. So it's not just like, oh, it's Eva's job because she's a woman. It's like everybody's doing it. Same thing with cleaning their rooms and stuff. I do, and this is my own fault. I'm like, oh, well, when Gabe was older, he needs to help, like, mow the lawn, right? And I don't see Eva getting on a John Deere mowing the lawn, but does she really need to mow the lawn? I guess she should, because eventually she's going to have to grow up and do it herself, if she has her own house. But so, yes, I agree. Like, I grew up, learning how to use power tools and how to put gas and how to do a bunch of different things. So I appreciate that my dad and my stepdad made sure that we were very self-sufficient, so that I didn't need a man to hang curtains or do things. So what I always say, it's like, yeah, I know how to do a bunch of stuff, but that doesn't mean that I want to do them. I still want George to do them, because he's a man. So yes, I'm leaning on the gender roles. It's like, if I do everything, then what is he gonna do? If I'm like cooking and cleaning and doing dishes and raising children and working, and I'm also like hanging my own things and doing like house, like hardware stuff, then what do I need him for? He needs to do something. So I'm here, hang this, go and do the yard, take out the trash. Like,
you gotta stay equals, right?
We gotta do equals. I don't want to take the trash. I mean, just because I can do it doesn't mean I want to do it. So I give it to him to do it.
Correct.
So to go back, I think what's important is to see that we should be teaching our children everything, right? So I think Eva should be mowing the lawn, for example, and then later figure out like who's good at what. Like if all the kids know how to do one thing, but one kid is better at this particular item, then you're teaching him something huge, right, for their future as well. Saying, man, Gabriel, you're really good at mowing the lawn, and Eva, you're super great at raking the leaves, and Bjorn's super great at putting the leaves in the bag. And then all of a sudden they're working united, and they feel good about themselves too, because they're doing something that they know that they're good at. And then later on, listen, I've owned my own house. I don't mow the lawn. I pay somebody to mow the lawn, because then you can make decisions like that later if you don't feel like doing something.
I really like that too, because you're highlighting their strengths. Because I think by nature we always kind of focus on our weaknesses, but we kind of have to force ourselves to look at our strengths sometimes. So I like the idea of saying, you know what, you're really like good at this because you're detail oriented and you do like whatever it is, right? Like kind of highlighting that for them too, I think is good.
Also, this might be like a little off subject, but since you repeated it, like filtered in my brain a little differently. I saw this thing on Instagram or TikTok yesterday, and it was about parents talking about their teenagers and how typically you hear parents say, oh, because they're giving me such a hard time, or oh, they're so rebellious, or they're so hormonal, or whatever, all that negative talk, right? And then it was a young girl, she was probably like in her early 20s. And she goes, well, you know what my mom did with me is that I would always hear her talk to my friends. Oh, my daughter's great. She doesn't give me any problems. She's so wonderful. She does X, Y, Z. So she would only talk about all the positive things. So then she, as a teenager, thought, oh, well, that's what I am, right? So I'm going to keep on doing that because that's what my mom says I am. Instead of flipping it, right, and only telling him the negative stuff, and then they keep on doing all the negative shit because that's what they keep on hearing that they are. Mm-hmm. So if we're purposefully focusing on what they're good at, then they're just gonna get better.
Right, from going from good to great.
I don't know. How do we try? I'd like to try out with Eva because Eva's a freaking disaster. So how do we, I mean, she does a lot of she does a lot of great things, but still, she's a mess. So I don't see how
there's no
positive is going to get her to be cleaner,
Of course it will. Okay, so Amy asked, why is she? We don't have to post this either if we don't want to. We can edit it later. But she's a mess because she doesn't like to pick up her room.
Well, she's a mess because she's a mess. Like you know what it is? It's the tablet. Like it's the electronics. Like. They're so focused on getting on their electronics that they're not very mindful of anything else. So like she'll leave her phone on the floor, or she'll leave like her electronics on the floor, or she came home yesterday and she came back with a bunch of materials and she was supposed to like organize them in her book bag. But instead of doing that, she just went straight to her tablet. And it's like, no, these are things that you need to be doing. Or she takes up clothes and leaves them around, doesn't brush her hair, doesn't shower, forgets to shower. It's like, she's a mess, and then she's like, oh, I don't know why I'm such a mess. And I don't tell her like, you're a mess, but she's like, no, I mean, I don't know why I'm such a mess. And I'm like, well, it's not like you're a mess. It's just like, there's things that you're not mindful about. So I'm trying not to like label her, and try to praise her for the good things that she does. But still, it's like, it's not enough. Like,
I feel like
it's really hard.
I feel like that's like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like that all teenagers are like that. I don't know if it's like their brains are, I don't know. I have no idea, but they're all like despistado. Like,
yeah, like that.
they're
Yeah.
so in their own world.
I think it's a
Like,
stage.
I think it's a like, because I saw it in all my brothers and Ricky, right? Like, they're like so hyper focused in their own world that everything else is like a simulation. Like, I swear.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
hope it's a phase because I don't run, like, I can't imagine her going to college. She's gonna live with rats because
No,
it's
I think
like
she'll. I think
gross.
she'll outgrow it. I think it's
I
just
hope
like a
so.
thing.
And
She's what,
she's a girl.
10 or 11?
She's 10. But the thing is, like, talking about stereotypes, she's a girl. Like, I have, the kids go to therapy for dealing with, their, situation with oh my God, their dad.
Their dad.
Your ex, the dad.
The dad. That's a whole other story. But I put them in therapy so they could have somebody to talk through the feelings and make sure that they had tools to address the situation. And even the therapist tells me, like, she's surprised that Eva is like that because she's a girl, and usually, like, she sees this behavior mostly in boys. And Gabriel's not as messy or dirty as Eva is. And Bjorn is even now like, I don't get in the bed because my feet are dirty. Like, he's, like, getting all mindful about it. So I don't understand why it's so hard for Eva, but it's that, like, she's in her own world and we're just a simulation.
Yeah.
So,
I swear. It's like a thing. I don't know.
Do they still have those things where you send your daughter to
finesse school.
What is it?
Like etiquette?
Finesse, like ladies.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yes.
I'm sure they do.
I mean, I'm sure they got canceled a long time ago because teaching your girl to how to be una señorita.
I don't know about like finesse, but I know they still do like etiquette for like eating. Like if you're like going with like a big boss and you don't know what to do with the little fork, like stuff like that. But I don't know about
Right.
like how to sit, how to dress. Like I don't know about that. But
Well, you're not supposed to cross your legs. You're supposed to just put them on the side.
the knees.
Yeah, the knees. Yeah.
Who sits like that? That's super. Listen, you know how I sit? I get one leg and I tuck it under the other.
Crisscross applesauce.
I don't know. I think our grandmothers would be like, what is it? Revolcándose and
Rolling in their grave.
rolling in their graves if they saw how we sit. Yeah. No.
I personally, I think it's all bullshit anyways. It's so stupid. Every time, I'm sorry, I'm like in a little like thing today.
Fuck this. I hate this. The bullshit.
Yes, all of it. All of it. All of
All the
it.
things.
It's like you're sitting at a table and you can't put your elbow on the table. Like, where did that come from? Why is that rude? Why is that like I don't like a lot of rules, which is the base
Rules
of my
for the sake
problem.
of having rules.
If just to have rules, like that
We
makes
know
no
where Billy
sense.
gets it from. She doesn't like.
Oh,
the
100%.
rules. Now we know where Billy gets it from.
And I tell her, and I try to use it to our advantage, right? I'm like, Mom does not have that many rules. So when I do say that there's a rule,
There's a
it's
rule.
an important one. And there's a good reason behind it. It's not like a whatever rule.
So, Adriana, I'm sorry, I'm curious. So, what is your perspective of a man crying? Like, because that's what you grew up seeing? Like, do you perceive it as like a weakness?
Oh my God. I struggle, like, I'm like, bro, it hurts me. Honestly, like when I see men cry, it freaks me out because I grew up with this whole idea that they're not supposed to cry. So if they cry, it's because like it's some tough shit, And if it's like boberia, then I'm like, bro, grow the fuck up, man up. So I'm like part of the problem, clearly. But then when I see my kids cry, I'm like, my boys, it's like, oh, what happened? Let's talk about it. Like, because I know that they need to, I'm trying to break the cycle.
So you're like in a tug of war with yourself.
Yeah. So part of me, it's like, when I see a grown man cry and I'm like, man, like what happened? It must be really rough because I know that they don't usually cry. So if a man is crying, it's because some big deal, right? And then if I hear there's some bullshit, then I'm like, bro, please, like, come on. But which makes me part of the problem. But with the little boys that I have, like I'm really trying to be mindful and allow them to have that expression and tell them it's okay to cry and work with George though, because George is like, no, they need to stop crying. Like, he's more of that tough it up, And I'm like, no, they need to talk about it. Because talking about it, helps them. So,
And I think, I think in the back of your head, like, like you have that awareness, because I feel like I think I've said this before, but I feel like men are only allowed to express anger and happiness. Anything outside of that is not the norm. And we're almost like creating this ticking time bomb. And that's why you hear on, Only in Dade, which is a Instagram for Miami-Dade County. It's like men shooting somebody because they cut them off. Like, what is that, right? But it's like they don't know how to regulate, right? So it's like, we can't really have it both ways of not letting them cry and then also hold them accountable for not knowing how to, you know what I mean? Like it's we have to find, again, it's a balance of everything, moderation, everything in moderation, even moderation. Yeah, I can definitely see how, like, sometimes, like, if they're constantly crying, I'd be like, what's going on? But
Well, when we have too much crying at the house, we start thinking back to how much have we rested? What are we eating? Are we consuming too much sugar? Are we drinking enough water? That's when it becomes like excessive, because sometimes I wonder, I'm like, at what age do these kids stop crying? But I think I answered that my own question at the beginning of the conversation. It's like, we never do.
yeah,
we never
I was
do.
gonna
It's
say
just
they
an
don't,
overflood.
My kids
Yeah.
like are 12 and 10, and they start crying, and then Gable goes this like deer in the headlights, and he gets really red, and I'm like, what? Are you gonna start crying? And then he's like, no.
con esa cara, she has this face like,
No.
are you kidding me?
You guys shouldn't ask if he's gonna start crying, because I'm totally killing his vibe. But I'm like, but it will be like boberia. So I'm like, are you gonna start crying? And he's like, no.
But it's not boberia to them.
I know, but it's so hard. Like, where do we draw the line about boberia? It's like,
We don't, Adriana. We do not draw the line with a 12-year-old on their boberia. They have to go through their boberias.
clearly I need as much therapy as they need, because sometimes I'm just like, bro, I can't. It's fucking hard. Listen, I'm gonna give you an example. We did the move. The Gables TV, which is a 32-inch, broke in the move. Like, it had like a scratch, so then the image doesn't work. So he's like, oh, I want to play with my PS5. When is George going to mount my TV? So we stop everything, because we're trying to be nice. So George goes and mounts the TV. And he turns it on, and he's like, oh, no. And I'm like, what happened? The TV's cracked. He can't play with PS5. He starts crying. And I'm like, don't worry, we'll get another TV. In my mind, I was like, at this point, I've spent so much money on everything. I'm like, fuck it, let's just buy another TV. George, can you get another TV? So we're like looking, so I'm like, oh, let's get a bigger one, since we already have to buy a TV. So he's getting now like a 40-something inch TV, which is bigger. And then, but are we picking it up? No, it's gonna come in the mail, like Amazon, whatever. Oh no, tears, because he wanted to play PS5. Mind you, I am in the middle of having my own mental breakdown, because I have to unpack all these boxes. I have all this work with clients. I have all this shit to do. I'm overwhelmed. All this, like, my world is collapsing, and this fucking kid is crying because he wanted to play PS5. And yes, I should be like, his world is also collapsing because PS5 is very important. But I'm like, really? You're crying about that? Like, you're getting a bigger TV. It's not like we're saying, no, you cannot have a TV. And there's a ambulance. I don't know if you hear River going crazy, but
I was trying to figure out if it was River or who it was.
it's River, ambulance over here, and freaking dinosaur. So clearly dad took something away from him, so he's losing his shit. But anyways, so I'm like, oh my God, so I told him, I should be the one crying. Do you want me to cry? And I don't unleash like the million things that I'm overwhelmed about. And then I'm like, you know what? You should be asking how to help me unpack and get your room ready and stuff like that, instead of just crying over the PS5. It doesn't fix anything. You're going to get a bigger TV. You're going to be able to play a PS5 later. Anyways, yes, parent fail. But I was like, oh no, we're not going to cry about PS5. It's not the end of the world. Imagine PS5. What's going to happen when his girlfriend breaks up with him in the future? Is he going to jump on the nearest bridge? Like, what the fuck? So, anyways.
No, you just told him to go get a bigger, better one.
I mean, I was like, at the end, it kind of worked out. We had another screen that we used for the golf simulator. So He put the screen for him so he wouldn't have to wait until Saturday to get a TV and he could play with PS5. Then I apologized.
Isn't that great though? Because you problem solved with him.
Well, yeah,
You know?
and then I apologize for the, it's fine. I'm sorry that you were, your TV broke and then you were overwhelmed about it. Still don't think you're crying over PS5 in the world, but I understand why it's upsetting. So then I had to do the repair part and acknowledge and give him a hug. So it wasn't a whole fail. It was just like half a fail. Does that count?
You repaired.
Yeah, that's what it was like. What is it? Lose
I
your
read
shit, repair, repeat.
I read this thing that was like that our triggers as parents come from the things that we were not allowed to do as kids. Because I was like, man, why does, when my kid just loses his shit, like over something, like you said, over something like his Legos fell, I don't know, whatever. Like, why does that just get under my skin? And it's like, man, I don't think I was really allowed to, like, I remember one time, oh my God, I must have been upset about something as a kid, and my grandmother just like, mira que fea te ve, and she showed me a mirror. So it was like I was not allowed to cry or be upset, like, because eso se ve feo. Like, I'm like, lady. So now I'm like, understand. So maybe like you said, Adriana, you weren't allowed to cry for what, Boberias, but they were important to you, right? So I think like it's so true. It is true.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if we tie that back to like toxic masculinity, we have a lot of angry men out there because they were not allowed to feel the feels and everything was like boberia and their feelings were dismissed all the time. So imagine you're a little boy and things are happening like the PS5 and then your parents are dismissing that and they're telling you that you need to toughen up and grow the fuck up and man up and stop crying. Right. So then when big things happen, you have like years of repressing every single feeling and then it boils over to like violence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think something that is also part of this whole toxic masculinity thing is that it also prevents men from seeking help, right? Yeah. So like they're less likely to even, to get a man to go to the doctor. Like they could have a broken leg. No, I'm good. Like, come on, man. Like you're not good. So even more so with mental health, right? To go seek therapy. So I think also like the fact that you've shown Gabriel like therapy is normal, like you're normalizing that. And to your point about like things to do, not only things not to do, but things we can actually do, is like normalizing crying, normalizing seeking therapy and going to the doctor when you need help. Like all of those things help break that stigma. So I mean, you're doing well. Like give yourself some credit, Adriana. I know that you're dealing with kind of like how you grew up, right? But I think you've taken like huge steps forward. So bravo to you.
Years of therapy are paying off.
There you go.
But the whole normalizing therapy, it's being really big because even like talking about it in a podcast, right? Like, do I want to mention that my older two kids are going to therapy? Are people going to be wondering when the fuck are they going to therapy? What happened to them that they have to go to therapy? And it's just as simple as my ex-husband is not in their lives and they need help dealing with that and navigating the new, like having their biological father not being a picture. Not because I chose that or because they chose that, but because my ex-husband has his own issues that he has to deal with and then he dropped out of the face of the earth. So I decided that they needed therapy just so that they could have like a unbiased person to talk about life and these things that were affecting them. Because of course, coming from me, I'm the enemy, right? Like, mom, you did this, but we all know I didn't do it, So anyways, so just kind of normalizing. And I know, for example, like my stepdad was not like therapy, for him was just like, if I go to therapy, it's like peeling an onion and then you're going to peel the onion. And he was like afraid that he was going to fall apart because that's what the idea is, right? Like the therapist get at the core of everything and then all the walls and all the stuff that you have built up crumble. And for him, just like the idea of that happening to him was like, no, so he would never go to therapy or think about therapy. My dad thinks that therapy is for like, probably the weak. Not that he said that, but the way that he talks about it, it's like,
Yeah, I
So-
mean, Latinos think eso es para los locos. That's for crazy people.
Yeah, it's for the
That's for
crazy
like
people.
el manicomio, you know? Yeah,
So
for sure.
I talk about
Everybody needs therapy.
Everybody should go to therapy.
Everybody across the
benefit.
board.
There's always something that you could improve, you know what I mean? Even if it's not a debilitating thing, because typically people wait until it's a crisis situation. But I definitely think there's things that a therapist could help you tweak. You know, even small things can make a big change in our lives. So I also went to therapy, just FYI. I had very severe anxiety when I was in my early 20s. Like I couldn't eat, and I'm already skinny. So I lost so much weight. I lost like 10 pounds, and I was basically like walking clothing. So I went to therapy. It changed my life. It gave me the tools that I needed, to navigate when it does arise, when anxiety does come. But I'm also a huge, mental health advocate. Like I'll encourage people to go. I see it as like, you're going to school to learn new tools. Like you said, Adriana, you're learning tools to navigate whatever it is that is affecting you. So that's good. I mean, this is all good. I think like we're breaking that perception of what therapy is, especially for men. And I also think it helps when men see other men doing it, right? Because they're like, oh, that's my wife or whoever is telling another woman telling me to feel my emotions. But when it comes from another man, I think it's almost more powerful to see that too.
Yeah, and I think that for our current situation, like George is not bought into the whole thing. So it's not like modeled behavior, like he's not against therapy because we did a couples counseling and therapy, but he hasn't done therapy himself. But he doesn't like talk bad about therapy, but it's not something like my kids are seeing from him either, right? Like he's still very much in that old school kind of, we just gotta be tough, and just keep going, right? So that's navigating that and and breaking the cycle of like, okay, let him cry, let him have his emotions, but at the same time, how do you bring them to be also resilient? Like the world's not gonna end. You're allowed to feel your feelings, but at some point you need to pick yourself up and get going.
Right. So something I've started to do with my son, he loves like those Magna tiles that they're almost like the new Lego, and he loves building different things or whatever. But obviously they fall sometimes, and he gets so upset. And I understand he puts a lot of work into like his design or whatever, and he'll be like, "Mommy," and I'm like, "Can we fix it?" Yeah. I'm like, "Okay, let's fix it." Every time is it fixable? Like to know that there's a solution on the horizon, right? Like we're not stuck in this broken pile of Magna tiles, right? So I feel like that helps him almost like process, oh, okay, like there's something to be done here. Like so I feel like that, and obviously he's very small, so it's different once they're older, but honestly,
Also, Magna tiles are hard.
are they? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm just playing.
They are. I sit down and play with Billy the Magna tiles, and I see the little papelito that does like princess castles. Cannot do that. I can't do them. I mean, she might be able to do them. Like Magna tiles are hard. That's the bottom line. And I like that you're saying, can you fix it? Because what I usually do with Billy was like, oh my God, we get to do it again. How great,
Yeah.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's my tactic.
I feel like his response over time after saying this 1,000 times, right, has been like, oh yeah, we can fix it, or like we can do it again, or whatever. So like even like that, I feel like has helped him regulate when those things happen.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to keep it present starting today. I like that.
And also, like, I really go back to Adriana. Like, again, I want to applaud you for normalizing therapy, because there is also a mental health component to it, right? Men are less likely to seek therapy. The suicide rate is 4 times higher among men than women. So that's, astronomical, right? So I think the less emphasis we put of like, you have to be like this one man show, nobody can help you, like the less we do that, I think the more we're providing a space for men to be healthy, all in all ways, right? So good for you.
We will try our best.
And let me ask you this: when you said when you were gonna take your your kids to therapy, was there any resistance, or they were like, okay, we're going? Like, how did they receive that they were going to start going to therapy?
So she's like, I don't need to go to therapy. I talked to you, like in her mind was like, just because we have a really good relationship. So she felt that by just talking to me about how she felt was plenty. She didn't really need to go to therapy. And I appreciated that, but I'm also biased, right? So I wanted to make sure that she had somebody to talk to. And that's kind of like why I ended up just getting the therapy. And then after she started, she really enjoyed also finding the right therapist. It's very important. So she clicked with the therapist, and she's great. Like, she's really fantastic. And
It's like dating. You have to find the right fit.
you have to find the right fit. So she's talking to her, and she's really great. And it's building that rapport, and they just talk. Like they shoot the shit, and then and in the middle of shooting the shit, we talk about challenges at home and things, and then she reinforces like the what they need to do, and then she provides feedback to me about what I need to do. Like, from Eva, it's like providing more praise. She needs praise, kind of letting her know when she's doing good things, which is hard though, because you give her praise about one thing, but then she's still a disaster. It's like, how do we like balance this out, right? And then with Gabriel, it's just kind of like, it's like team tagging it. I don't even know if that's the right word, but talk about like Gabriel wants to do more videos that are violent, for example, that are outside of his age range. But then it's like, well, there's research that shows that violent video games, like the effects of violent video games on boys' brains. So then I'm like, hey, like, can we talk about this? So we compromise on things. So she's kind of like support system in a way. And then coming from a professional, that makes sense to them, as opposed to like mom is just nagging. It's almost like when you hear from a third person, then it makes more sense. There was a study made actually that children listen to, like, when you drop off your kid and they behave so well with like the aunts or other people, but then when they come home to you, they're like evil. So apparently there's like research around that, and it has to do
It's
with
because they feel so comfortable with you, is what it is. And I either read it or saw it, on Instagram or TikTok, which is basically the same thing. And Bill sent it to me in a reel, and it was interesting because last week we went and we took Billy to my sister-in-law, to Maria's house, because my mom, I think, was with you, and we needed somebody to watch Billy. So I called I called my brother and my sister-in-law, but she's the one who was available. She's like, yeah, I'm going to go to BJ's. I'll bring Billy with me. And we made it like a whole thing. Yo me estaba muriendo. I was like, Bill, if she acts out with Maria, like, this is going to be the first and last time that she's going to want to watch her. And I checked in a bunch of times, and then I go pick her up, and Maria's like, oh my gosh, she was great. Como si nada. She did great. She listened. She this, she that. And then when we get back home, Bill's like, look what I saw. She's only crazy. We call her crazy to her face. We don't talk bad about her behind her back. And she's like, it's because she feels so comfortable with us that she, let's say, acts out or does things that she wouldn't typically do. And then with other people, it's like she's an angel.
Yeah.
Does no wrong.
That they do that with moms, because that happens all the time. Like, I'll come home and they're like, oh, he was doing so good until you came home. And I was, oh, fucking great.
I think it's kind of like that change in gears when they're like, if Billy's with me for a long period of time, and then number one, Bill comes into the house, it's like she gets excited because dad's home, and it's like shifting this gear of, okay, I was with mom and I was playing this, but now I think like I see her little brain start working, like, oh, now I get to go to the beach with dad, or I get to go do this with dad. And then they get these just overexcited and emotions, and then they get a little cray-cray.
So let me ask you, Amy, because, Greg is not Latino, and then you're raising a little boy. So how do you see like Greg's involvement what is his take on masculinity, and his view of how you should raise your son?
Sure. It's funny because even though he's not Latino, his dad actually, he says this in our one-on-one interview. He says that his dad at one point, like he was having a hard time. He had the really bad psoriasis and it was taking a mental toll on him. And we were waiting to hear back from the insurance company to make sure that he could get the medication, blah, blah, blah. So in that waiting period, I guess he cried to his dad. He was in so much physical pain and agony. And he said his dad, who's not Latino, says, "Oh, you can't let Amy see you like this." And Greg's response was like, "She's seen me cry before. Like, what's the big deal? Like, if there's anybody who should see me cry and be my support, my backbone when I'm not strong for whatever reason, it should be my spouse, right?" So that, to the point of, it's not just a Latino thing or a Caribbean thing or whatever. It's a man thing, right? So this is somebody who grew up in Michigan. It's nothing to do with growing up in Miami, nothing. So, you know, his perspective is, and I've had to kind of coach him through this too, because he probably did have his dad in his ear a little bit. You know, I'm like, cry. Like I said, I grew up with a father who was comfortable with crying when it was appropriate. I mean, it's not like my dad was crying every day, obviously, but like I saw it happen and I didn't think twice about it. So I kind of, I give him the space to do it. And we're kind of on the same boat of letting our son cry when he feels necessary. And he has seen us cry and he comes and tries to comfort us. So like, you know, he does the same things that we teach him, like we'll hold his hand and he'll come and, "Daddy, you know, breathe," or "Do you want a hug?" Like, so we're fine with, you know, letting him feel his feelings, and not kind of teaching him to repress that, whatever it might be.
So you cry in front of him and you have your...
Yeah, I've had my moments and he'll come up to me and say, "Mommy, I love you," or "Breathe." Like like I'm saying, he'll do the same things that we do for him, but so it's kind of nice to see. I think it was you that mentioned, like, when you see your child display empathy, that you feel good. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing something right, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So he's definitely
I
observed.
think I'm doing something wrong because my child does not have any empathy for me. Like when I'm hurt, I can't really recall any time that I've cried in front of her. But when I'm like, something happens and I'm hurt and I'm like in pain,
Like
and I'm
physically hurt.
showing
Okay,
that.
okay.
Yes. And she just looks at me and she's like, she just walks away and starts doing something else. I'm like, "Oh, love me a little, please." So I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing wrong there, but I'll figure it out. Cause I'm the opposite with her. Like if something's wrong with her, I'm like maybe a little too much. Like I hover and I hug and I squeeze and I'm like, "Let me carry you. Let's just sit here. Let me hold you," you know? Mm-hmm. But whatever. It's off subject. I was just ranting.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it's not... I don't cry in front of kids. It's very... I don't like crying in front of people. Maybe because I was told not to cry as a kid, so I have a really hard time crying in front of people. You know?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not like crying to him. Like, but maybe I'm like, I'm having a moment in the kitchen and he walks in and he's seen me cry, like whatever it is, you know, like,
Yeah, I hide. I think that's probably what it is. Like, you won't see me having a moment in the kitchen. Like, I go to my bedroom, or I leave, cry in the car, or I cry in the shower. I don't. That's what I mean. Like, I don't.
Do you think it's like people are gonna see like, "Oh, this weakling"?
Well, in part is that, and I also grew up. I was very emotional as a kid. I still am. So it was looked upon like, "Oh, there she is being emotional again," you know. So I didn't like that feeling of you know, people thinking that.
Yeah, and you also like, you describe yourself as an alpha woman, so maybe that almost conflicts with how you feel about yourself, right? So
Yes, exactly.
I have a feeling also it's what reaction you're going to get from somebody else and how that's going to translate to you. Like, are you going to have the support that you need from whoever's in the house at that moment, from your mom, you know, or from your husband? You know, you might not get what you need. So it's like, you're like, it's better off, let me do this by myself. You know, let me self-soothe.
Yeah, well, my mom is not gonna be soothing me. And then I also don't want people to worry, and I don't want the kids to worry. So I tend to just not, I'd rather just deal with it on my own and cry by myself in the corner. I know it sounds really sad, but that's how I deal with it.
We all manage differently.
That's how you're dealing.
So whatever works for you. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do that. But I mean, it's important.
Yeah, I can understand not worrying people either, because I feel like I live not worrying Bill, but in other things, like I don't ever want him to worry about money. I don't want him to worry about the business. Like those are the main things. But then when it's like my emotional state, I am sorry. It's a free for all. Like I am crying and I am screaming and I'm pataleteando and I'm saying everything that's on my mind because I don't know what other way to be. Like I can't hold things in. I'll hold it in for like a little, but then it's dangerous because if I hold it in too much, it festers and it gets really ugly, so that was a lot of therapy too.
Yeah.
100%. When I got divorced back in 2004, that was the first time that I did therapy. And I am convinced 100% that the little bit of therapy that I did back then has 100% pulled me through 18 years of being with Bill.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. Don't be scared of therapy, people. Yeah. But like you said, it's important to let it out because I think that's when you get the explosive scenarios, right? Like the people getting shot over a parking spot, right? It's like, I guarantee you it wasn't the parking spot that did it. It's probably years or a month of a situation that they just haven't been able to manage, let's say, maybe not solve, but manage. And I think what's the statistic is like 80 to 90% of violent crimes are committed by men. So there's definitely a correlation there. So to your point is finding your outlet, right? Whatever that looks like, whether it's going on a walk. I always say this, Adriana, I have to tell you, whenever I get upset, I'm like, I need to put myself on timeout. Like I totally stole that from you. Because sometimes you just need a minute to collect yourself, right? But it's better to do that than to just have this explosive moment with your spouse, with your parent, with your sibling, with your kids, like whatever that is, it's better to remove yourself. So it's just like finding that tool that works for you so that you don't end up on Only in Date, right? And you don't ruin your relationship.
100%. I don't remember if we spoke about this in the last episode, but I did a walk away the other day, like probably like 2 weeks or so, that Billy, I don't even remember what the meltdown was about, but I couldn't stand there and be the best mom that I could be. And I was about to explode. And I just told Bill, I'm like, I'll be right back. Can't do it. I'll be right back. And I had to go do something with the building association, so it took a little longer than I should have. And I come back and Billy's still having the meltdown. And the horrible part is that then Bill was having a meltdown. He was holding it in, right? But after everything was calm, he's like, you can't do that again to me. And I'm like, you don't understand. I had to. Like, this wasn't towards you. This was like not showing Billy the side of I don't want that mom side. I don't want her to ever think of me as being explosive. I didn't have that in my life. And I can only see if I did how bad that would be. And that's not to say I'm not perfect. I've yelled at her before and, we've been extremely firm and all that. But that moment, like, I don't even know what. I was going to be a really bad person. So I'm like, I'm exiting. I'll be back.
And we're not going to be 100% every day. I mean, that's just reality. So, like I said, it's just finding what works for you, how to manage what's going on. So anything else that you guys have, like, that you think would help foster our young men to have healthier relationships, healthier regulation, like anything like that you can think of?
I think aside from the therapy part and like finding, like if you haven't found the right partner yet, like your life partner, right? For the person you're marrying or whatever, finding like a good friend, that good support system that's going to try to help you through things. I mean, at the end of the day, your spouse is like your best friend anyways, but if you don't have that, then at least find someone that will give you that support if you're not open to doing therapy right away. And then like some real deep digging on yourself. Like when you ask, why am I so angry today? You write it down. What made you angry, right? And then from there, why was that a trigger? Why did I get angry at that trigger? And man, that is going to lead you down a rabbit hole that you're probably not going to be happy with. And you might have to take a pause and get back to it the next day, but it's fine because every little bit is going to get you that progress. So basically self-help. If you don't want to go get it somewhere and you're not sure why, you're not sure how or that you can right now, at least start asking yourself the why. But you have to keep on with the why until you get to the baseline of it.
So what I'm hearing is venting to like a good friend who's willing to listen, and journaling, maybe a self-help, like you said, something about self-help, like a book or an audio book or something to help you find the why, right?
I think talking to your kids also, like, about everything, like one of the things that I'm new to this. Like I tell the kids all the time, like I'm learning as we go, and I'm learning with you guys. And I like to have conversations with the kids and Gabriel, and we have very open, honest conversations, and I think that's really helped us kind of keep that line of understanding where he's coming from, what is he doing. Like sometimes he doesn't want to talk about it, and I tell him it's okay, we don't have to talk about it right now, but we'll talk about it at some point. Because I can see that he's that kid that just internalizes everything. He just keeps it all in, and then he turns into it manifests in controlling situations. Like he starts trying to be controlling of things. So I made a point of like, I don't, like Jenny says, like I don't label things. I don't call it toxic masculinity or bad or good, but just try to talk everything through. We talk so much that even like with, George is like, you had that conversation with him, when we talk about sex. And I'm like, yes,
Of course.
I talked to him about everything. And I don't know, for me, it's something special that we have that relationship. And I know that's like, oh, it's mom, and it should maybe be dad having those conversations, but I don't mind being mom and telling what's up, and then making sure that he feels that he can be vulnerable and he can be transparent, and I will always be there for him and have his back, because I don't know, it's gonna get harder as he gets older, and maybe he won't have a friend that he can confide on, but I really hope that he feels like he can talk to me,
right,
or that he looks for a partner that talks to him the way that I talk to him, just making sure that he feels heard, and that he sort of maybe emulates that in the future. So like I didn't have that,
So building that safe space, like that you can be their safe person. Awesome. So he can talk to you when he's ready. I like that. I love that.
Yeah. But we talk about it. I don't let him sit on it. Like, it's like, oh, you can have your time, but we're going to talk about it anyways. And I have to like almost like pull it out of him, and it's hard because sometimes you want to be judgy as fuck. Like, really? That's it? But you just have to like, So half of we'll talk when you're ready. It's also me preparing myself to like, it might be something silly and I still need to like handle it. Like if it was something really, really important, because clearly it's important to him. So, but communication, working through how they manifest their aggression, working through how they deal with their feelings, and then, like you said, can we fix it? Is it fixable? Because if it's fixable, then we need to focus our energy on like, how do we fix it, and not so much on what happened. And setting up boundaries. I think that's important too. Like that they feel that they can set boundaries, because a lot of our anger and a lot of my anger as I was growing up is that I couldn't set boundaries, and it was very hard, even as an adult. Setting up boundaries with family was difficult, and then you got labeled, right? Because, oh, you're being difficult. No, I'm not being difficult. I'm setting boundaries because you're basically like, I don't want to deal with your shit. So doing all of that, I think it helps them develop not only like a healthy way of managing conflict, but also overcoming conflict and talking about it, so that they don't internalize that oppression or that aggression, and then it manifests in things that are like toxic masculinity. So.
You're giving him a big gift of communication.
And
he
also,
sucks at it. To this day, like you have to spoon, like you have to pull it out of him, you know. But sometimes he comes on his own, you know. It's like, so I'm like, yes. What happened?
yeah, and I think you're also teaching him self-awareness, right? To know and feel what, like how that frustration starts to feel as it starts to boil, like before you have that boiling point, right? So all and learning, mastering yourself, I think is important too. Like learning yourself, right?
Yeah. Bob and journals, him and Eva, about anger management as of last year. Because they were like just pissy and taking it out on each other. And I was like, oh, no. I took away the electronics for a month. And I bought them journals on how to like.
Here's your
anger
new tablet.
management and things like that. Yeah. Here, figure it out. You're going to read this about how to like manage your anger and how do you do this and that. And they had like prompts and they have to do it. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we've had a great discussion today. Like we really took a deep dive, and I appreciate everybody on this podcast. And we hope you've enjoyed listening to our little trio here. And check us out next week or in 2 weeks for our following episode. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Disclaimer, this podcast does not provide medical advice. We're just three Latin moms sharing our story, hoping it will help you through your journey. Seek professional medical advice when needed.